Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for such a nice introduction. As you said, we've been doing International Women's Day gatherings and forums for a lot of years now, and it's my favorite event of the year. This year is even more important. At the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, we come to work every day really focused on how business does well, does good, and prepares for the future. And the pandemic and recession have shown us in real and often excruciating ways how important that is and how fragile it is, and yet how strong we can be as well. We know what a job means to a person and a family and a community, and we really work hard for that every day. As Mark said, it's distressing and disturbing to see how many women have been leaving the workforce for a lot of different reasons, but particularly women of color. And it's an important conversation that we're going to have today because the choices that we make as business leaders and employers and government officials, civil society leaders, the choices that we make today are going to impact gender and gender equality for years to come, not just in this moment. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by a really inspiring woman leader, someone who's broken gender barriers and has lifted so many people around her. Margaret Keane, as Mark said, is the CEO of Synchrony, a Fortune 500 consumer financial services company with award-winning consumer banking products. What I think you're going to find so interesting when she speaks is how culture and employee engagement and diversity are as core to her leadership as financial statements and earnings calls. And they should be because they go together. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as you listen to her talk, think about this backdrop of accomplishments. Under her leadership, Synchrony's board is one of the most diverse in the financial services sector. Under her leadership, the company was recently recognized by Forbes' Just 100 list for the care that it's shown to employees during this pandemic. Under her leadership, Synchrony has been named a best place to work for LGBTQ employees, a best place to work for veterans, and a best company to work for, period, which is an amazing run of accomplishments. And Margaret herself has been consistently named one of Fortune's most powerful women. So this is a woman who can teach us a master's class about inclusive leadership, and I'm so pleased to get right to it. Margaret, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Carolyn, for having me. Really appreciate it.
I've got so many questions for you, but I'm going to start with a big picture question about the economy. And, as we've discussed, and as everyone on this meeting knows, the pandemic and the recession have set women back in so many staggering ways. But we have a moment here to make good choices about how we recover in a better way. And the term inclusive recovery is one we hear often. And I think everyone has their own interpretation of how they incorporate that into their leadership and into their companies. So my question is, what does inclusive leadership and inclusive recovery mean to you?
Well, I think this is where we as corporate leaders have to really step back and look at the impact that the pandemic had, especially on women, right? And I think one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about and continuing to really evaluate and drive is really the workplace flexibility. I think one of the things that came out loud and clear, and this, was particularly stark when schools were closed, right? So you had the whole system kind of go upside down, and women had to really pick up a lot of those roles, not only in the sense of being home, but also helping at the beginning. I think all of them would say, trying to do teaching, trying to keep things focused. And, it became, I think, an area of much need for corporations to really step back and think about, okay, post-pandemic, how do we create an environment where there's just a lot more flexibility? So I think, and we were talking earlier, this idea of giving people the choice of, do they come to the office? Don't they come to the office? How many days do they come to the office? How do we give them that flexibility? I think will be a real positive once we, kind of get back into the office, but I don't think it'll be 100% in the office. And in our company, we're actually giving people the choice of staying 100% home. I think the other is childcare. I think that has come out to be, a big challenge. And, there's the expense of childcare, but also the idea of helping people with childcare. So, maybe we'll talk a little later about some of the innovative things we did around that, starting last year with a virtual summer camp and then continuing throughout. And then I think there's this whole area, and you hit on it, of mental health and wellness. I think this has come out to be, I think, something that we knew and I knew was underneath the system. But I think the pandemic has brought it out to just a whole different level. When you add on the pandemic plus social injustice, it's just put an enormous amount of stress and strain on people. And I think we've all, as corporate leaders, have to step back. As a matter of fact, we are conducting now 100 Days of Wellness, and it's really an important topic for us, both in terms of actual health, but also, mental health as well.
Childcare is just an overwhelming issue in so many ways. At the foundation, we've done a lot of work about the impact of childcare on economic development, particularly when it holds women back, in this case, from returning to work. And I can say for me at the foundation, it's the number one issue that I have faced in terms of caring for my team. I'd love to hear about what you had done with virtual summer camps and other things. I think it's something every manager can learn from. No one is immune from childcare issues on their team.
Yeah, and I'd add one other little twist. I think it's both childcare and elder care, because I do think both of those things fall upon women. And I think both create a lot of stress. So I think the first thing that happened is last summer, talking to my CIO, Carol, who is a mom of 3, including twins, she, basically started talking about the stress everyone was feeling, and in particular, how are they going to handle the summer? And, as you know, all summer activities were shut down. So we came up with this idea of a virtual summer camp for all ages. And what was really cool about it is we actually allowed students of our work employees, so high school students and college students who maybe didn't have a job, to help conduct our summer camps. So these things range from things like, arts and crafts, up to learning how to code, to, math contests, to baking skills. And what I think was really interesting is the creativity that the team pulled together in a very quick period of time was really fascinating. And it was global, because we have employees here in the US as well as Philippines and India. And I think the other really nice thing about the virtual camp is everyone got to see families in a whole different way. I think that's one positive of the pandemic, is it's hard to separate the two because we're all working in our homes. And I think it's created a whole new level of interaction between our employees amongst themselves. So, and then what we did, we said, okay, kids are going back to school in the fall. And one of the things we heard in the spring was people really had a hard time with math. They teach math differently. So we ended up creating an after school program that's continuing now, that offers tutoring sessions in different subjects, has different activities for the younger kids. And it's really been a big win across the board, particularly for parents who are trying to keep it all together.
Wow, it's easy to see why friends of mine have said they think Synchrony is a great company and a cool company to work for. That's really creative. I know that you have made racial equity and diversity in your hiring and recruitment and retention a really big priority in your leadership. Can you take us back to, you were an early adopter. Take us back to your early thinking and how that's evolved with your company.
Yeah, look, I was diverse, right, in terms of how I started out my career. And I think it's always been something that's been important to me. But I think the most important thing, and this is where I think we have to rethink our equation as corporations, right? Our most important people are the people in the front lines, right? They're the people who are representing your company every single day. So in our case, it's mostly our call center people, our field sales organization, who are out there with our partners and our clients. And guess what? They should look like our customers look, right? So it's a pretty simple equation. And I think the other thing that we've learned, and I think this is really meaningful, is the more diverse thinking you have, and it's not just about diversity for the sense of having all diverse people, right? Having diverse thinking actually creates better products and better outcomes. And so when you really think about diversity and inclusion, it's really not like a nice to do. From a business perspective, I think it's really an imperative thing to do, because I think it makes you a better company and more competitive company, and one where, you can win more in the marketplace. So it's something that, look, we're not perfect. We still have a ways to go. But I feel like the positive of what's happened this past year is a whole different level of dialogue, a whole different level of understanding. And, I think it's going to make our company, at least, just a better company to work in.
Do you find that at your board level too? I just think it's such an interesting point that your board, one that you built, is one of the most diverse in your industry. How did you do that? You've got the customer facing side, but also the board leadership.
No, it was interesting, because I would say at the beginning, we had the opportunity to set up a completely new board from scratch, right? So that's a positive. But at the same time, when you go to the headhunters who give you names, they kept giving us a lot of very similar looking people. And I'm just like, nope, this isn't going to work. And then I started Googling names. Like, I would go on and start Googling people to look for people myself. I think two things I'd say. Look, you need the skill set on the board that's going to ensure that the board is run from a good governance perspective. So you can't forsake skill set. But what you can do is maybe take chances on some people who didn't have a board slot before, but actually can bring something to the table. And so we did, to get to the diversity we wanted to, we did pick a couple of people where this was their first public board. And I think just like giving a chance to somebody in a corporation, right? We have to give more chances to diversity in the boardroom. Again, not forsaking skill sets, because I think that's really important from a governance point of view. But we need to help build that infrastructure, if you will, of diversity in the boardroom by giving people more chances. And I think we did that for a couple of our board members, who have turned out to be phenomenal board members, by the way. We didn't forsake anything.
Going a level up to CEO positions, you're one of just a few women in the S&P 500. In fact, there are less than 6%. I read the other day that there are more men named Michael and James who are CEOs in that group than there are women. Right? It's funny, but it's not funny.
I know.
But, here we are in 2021. What do you think is the reason, or number of reasons, why we're still seeing such low numbers of women in those top leadership roles?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the math. I feel like, there've been some really big ones just named that are really powerful, whether it's, Jane Fraser at Citi, I'm trying to think of, there are a couple of others that have been named. I think we're going to see more women. I think it's really around, really the succession planning process,
Mm-hmm.
and having that process within the corporations to ensure we're looking across the group of people who are available to really, take on these big roles. But I do think it's going to start shifting and will shift. It's slower than I think any one of us would have liked. Right. And, even in the financial services arena, it's, a couple of us are stepping down, and some last year. I'm stepping down this year. There's going to be less women in financial services again, which, we were making progress. And I think we're taking a little step back, which is a little disappointing. But look, I have hope and faith that, I really feel like there's been a tide change, and it's not a question of if, it's more like when, because I do feel like the boards are paying a lot more attention to this. We're all being asked by our shareholders to pay more attention to this, which I think is also setting a different stage.
Did you have someone early in your career who took a chance on you?
Totally. I feel like I've had, and it was mostly men, not all men, but I would say mostly men who were big supporters of me, from the early days of when I was working part-time in Citibank as a collector while I was going to college. The person kind of running the group, asked me to help him because he was going for his PhD to work extra hours, helping him out doing some things. And, he then sponsored me for the management trainee program, right? So that's how I would have never thought of even applying for the management. I didn't even know if I wanted to be in banking, to be very honest. I was like, let me think about it. But it was a good job and they were going to pay for my master's, which I really needed. So, I think all of us have to pay attention to those people who are trying to pull us up. Mm-hmm. And, I moved out of city to GE. GE was a big place to kind of make your name. And I was lucky enough to work for someone who really took to me and helped me move my career along. And, I always tell this story, like when I was in the boardroom and presenting in a meeting with Jack, I was sitting in the back row and, he actually turned around and said, hey, come up here and sit next to me. And, that's a big sign, right? It kind of gave me confidence. And so I pay attention to those things. I pay attention to who's talking in a room, who's not talking in a room, making sure people have a voice, making sure people sit at the table, and making sure they're feeling like they're part and not just sitting in the back. And I think as leaders, we can all pay attention to that.
Yep. Well, I think that you certainly brought the other half of the equation, which is the willingness to be coached and the willingness to take that step. Our CEO at the Chamber, who is retiring, is famous for his sayings. And one of them that we were just talking about this morning is, I can come up with leadership responsibilities and new roles, but you have to pick up that pencil too. Mm-hmm. And so it's a two-sided equation. And my hope is that women will be more eager and have the confidence to pick up that pencil, as they say.
I think that's still a big issue. It's pretty surprising to me, the little voice women have in their head. I always tell people, shut that little voice down. The little voice that tells you all the reason you can't do something, or your nervousness on something, or wanting to be a perfectionist. Women have to shut that voice down, because I think sometimes they're their own worst enemy in terms of their capabilities and what they really can aspire to be.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're almost out of time, but I want to end on a looking forward note, which is, when we have this event again next year for International Women's Day, and I'd love to have you back again. What do you think could be different a year from now in terms of progress on an inclusive recovery? And what are some things that make you optimistic?
Well, I am very optimistic. I am very hopeful. I will tell you, in all my years of working, this was the toughest year ever in terms of all the challenges we faced. But on a very, very positive note, I do think the dialogue happening inside of corporations, inside of boardrooms, inside of business meetings around diversity and inclusion, around women, around how do we do more, around healthcare, around wellness, around childcare. These conversations are in the forefront, and I work on the Business Roundtable. I'm part of that. I hear many of the other CEOs having those same conversations. So I think, we're at a pivot point in our society, I think, where corporations are kind of rethinking how they play their role in society. And I think the biggest is with their employee base. So it's pretty exciting, I think. I'm very hopeful that we're going to see real change and a new beginning for, diversity and inclusion across the board.
Well, Margaret, thank you for everything you've done, for leading a company and being an example to so many women. And thank you for being with us today.
Well,
I think we all learned a lot. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much. Have a great meeting and session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.